Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. We are super pumped today because we have a very special guest, someone I've gotten to know really only over the last 2 months or so. Shot him a cold DM. He answered. Conversation kind of kicked off. We went and got some food. We've been on a few runs together at this point. Went to the gym. Just a ton of connection, and I'm really excited for him to be here today because I think that his story not only brings a ton of value, but his continued story brings a ton of value and kind of how he approaches life and what he's moving towards. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce him. His name is Shawn Livingston. Shawn, I introduce most people and kind of give a little bit of their story to get the audience or the viewer comfortable with everything. But with someone like you, it's really hard for me to just group you into one thing or one place.
Right.
So my question to you, Shawn, is for the audience, who are you?
It's a very good question. People would think it's an easy question, but I don't think it's an easy question to answer. But I'm somebody who's just been, very blessed and very lucky to have been through some adversity and come out on the other side and realize that I had like a deep feeling in my heart that I needed to use that experience of everything I've been through and step out in a vulnerable way and in an authentic way and share my experience to try to help whoever I can. So much negativity in the world, man. It's just trying to put some positivity out here. And, I didn't know a world existed where I could ever take all the pain and, problems I caused throughout addiction or throughout, my bouts with mental health or everything, and never see a world where I could use that to help people. And then I started being able to understand and see that firsthand and help people and watch the difference that it not only made in their lives, but my life as well. And so it's for the first time in my life, I don't know exactly what it is I do, but whatever I'm doing, I'm meant to be doing, if that makes sense.
100%. And before we dive into your childhood, I do want to hit on kind of how I view you a little bit, just off getting to know you the last couple months. And we haven't had any surface level conversations over the last couple months. Pretty sure we've never talked about the weather or anything along those lines.
Nah.
It's been pretty much at depth every single time. But when I see you, I think of you as someone who has built themselves up to carry some of the burden for people until they're ready to carry it for themselves. That's where I see you. That's how I see you, is this person who's built themselves up enough where they can help others. And sometimes that's by like helping them carry their weight until they're ready to step out on their own. And I have nothing but the deepest respect for that.
Dude, appreciate it.
Absolutely. So to continue to get the audience comfortable and kind of get an understanding of where you're from so we can get to where you're going. Where are you born and raised? Where'd you grow up?
So I was actually born in Huntsville, Alabama. Didn't spend much time there, but I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. So Northeast Ohio was a flourishing, city back in the day when the steel mills were around and still operating. But once the steel industry went down in Northeast Ohio, Pennsylvania, that whole Rust Belt area, it just like completely decimated the area. So grew up there. My mother's a college professor. She was a teacher. My stepfather worked in the steel mills. They raised me. I had my dad left when I was 2, but that's nothing that's not common, I don't think, with a lot of people in our generation. All that being said, I had a very good upbringing. I was taught values and character and how to work hard being from, the Northeast. And, nothing I don't think would point to or prepare me for, what laid ahead as far as addiction or any of that type of stuff went.
For sure. And to tie into that, I got to spend some time in Northeast Ohio for college, for school. And that area of the country, it's a different mentality. I think of like Pittsburgh, Youngstown. It's just a different grind.
For sure.
I think that people work differently, they move differently, they act differently. And I was fortunate enough while I was in college to have a couple teammates from Youngstown. They called it the Yo.
Yep.
The Yo. And different breed of person. I can speak to one of them, and I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but I had a close teammate from Youngstown, raised by a great family, amazing dude. Got hurt while we were playing ball. ended up diving down the opiate route through prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
Script ran out. You know the story, right? And by his senior night was high on heroin, right? And so he's overcome that now. He's out in the community and he's helping people. That's his whole life mission. But it's interesting. He's also from Youngstown.
Yeah.
You know, same type of environment. But that being said, so you grow up in Youngstown, you grow up in that area. Would you say that, like, what was your first love as a kid, or as, you know, middle school or high school? Like what kind of got you going?
Basketball, without a doubt. Was always an athlete growing up, but basketball just spoke to me in a different way than other sports did. Oddly enough, I was probably better at baseball than I was basketball, but basketball was my thing. And then if you think about it, you know, there's 9 players on a baseball field, 11 on a football field, 5 on a basketball court. You know, in all honesty, being white did not help my chances. Could never jump super fast. Could never jump super high. Was never super fast. But basketball was just my passion, man. And so I just dove into it head first and did everything I could to make basketball an enormous part of my life.
I'm going to ask a silly question.
Go ahead.
Favorite basketball player of all time?
Jason Williams. White chocolate.
I didn't know that, but I feel like you've probably said that on a podcast before, and I might have seen a clip at some point. I would have guessed Jordan solely based off of, like, kind of your vibe.
Okay.
In a lot of ways, right?
Well, I mean, Jordan's up there for sure, but right. I mean, if I had to,
J. Will.
Yeah, that was just, J. Will spoke to me in a different way, dude. It was just, I was so, I mean, I was a hip hop head growing up. I was so infatuated with street culture, and then, you know, as I was getting into high school, the And One mixtapes start coming out and glorifying the dribbling and everything. So when I saw Jason Williams dribble a basketball and, you know, behind the back elbow pass and all this stuff, my head exploded. But I mean, as an adult, you know, you watch Jordan or Kobe or any of these guys, and I definitely identify with, you know, their mindset and the way they handle their business. But Jason Williams was just that flashy. Like, that was that guy.
He's probably like the first white dude with swagger that I can think of.
Pistol Pete Maravich.
Different swagger.
But that era, but yes, I get what you're saying.
And it's probably because, I mean, you look at Jason Williams and you think about where he grew up and who he grew up around and who he got to play with.
Right.
Right. And so he kind of had to elevate himself to a level to make himself known. But he did. He had a really special career. And it's funny because there's another podcast, I think it's called Up in Smoke or something like that. It's Matt Barnes.
All the Smoke.
All the Smoke.
I think.
But they talk about, like, they bring different guests on, obviously, and they're asking these guys, like, who their favorite player is. And it's, ironically, it's funny, but, like, a lot of these guys are like, man, White Chocolate.
Yeah.
He was incredible. So I appreciate you answering that. I've been curious about that.
You know what, just sitting here thinking more on it now, his authenticity, like, that's him. He's him all the time. The way he talks, acts, his mannerisms, like, that's him. And you can never see a time in his career where he, like, put that away. He was always J. Will, and I just respect the hell out of that.
Still to this day.
Yeah.
Like, his voice hasn't changed.
Right.
None of it. No, I love that too. So I can definitely understand why you would identify with that. Transitioning, like, through your athletic career, was there ever a thought of, like, athletics are going to take me to the next level? Like, that's my avenue. Like, that's how I'm going to get there. Or was there a thought of, like, I'm going to go to college no matter what, or, like, I'm not going to go to college? Like, what was that process like for you?
I think I was just blindly dreaming that I was going to be a basketball player. On one hand, I wanted to be a basketball player. On the other hand, I wanted to be a WWF wrestler. I was, like, torn between the two, but playing basketball in school and all that was just my friends all hooped, and that was just our thing. And so, yeah, I thought that I was going to go play college ball and all that. I ended up going over to a prep school, Catholic school over in Pennsylvania, and ended up playing there. They were in contention for state every year. And that's kind of where I found out, like, up until that point, I had only been getting by on just athletic talent, you know, God-given athletic talent, and just the love of always playing basketball. I did not yet understand that there's a separation between just natural talent and then raw hard work. I didn't understand that there were people out there shooting 1,000 free throws a day and, you know, dribbling up and down on a rock rock driveway with thick gloves on to work on their ball handling and all that. And so I got over around that, and I was like, oh wait, these people do this all year round. And I think, just being young and having an attitude and probably not being the most coachable young man, thinking I was better than everybody and all the ego, where I just went over there and, I was just, all of a sudden I was just a small fish in a big pond real quick. And then my junior year, I ended up getting in a car accident on my way to school. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Very dumb. I was probably messing with my CD player. I just got my license not long before, got a system in my car, and so I'm banging music all the way to school, and just hit a patch of black ice, not wearing a seatbelt. Tree ripped through the vehicle. I was out over the windshield, broke my jaw, a laundry list of other injuries, and so that's kind of where that all derailed, where all of a sudden now my senior year of basketball kind of got taken away from me my junior year, and then which put me so much behind to go into my senior year. The likelihood of me playing college ball and everything was not good.
To not to state the obvious, and it might not be obvious, I don't know, is after that car accident your first exposure to like prescription meds?
It was. I remember them giving me those prescriptions, but it didn't. It hadn't sparked the allergy.
Okay.
I don't think. I think whatever they gave me is probably I took as my mother would give it to me.
Got it.
But I hadn't made the connection yet of like getting messed up. Basketball, until I lost basketball, drinking, drugs was not a conscious thought in my head. That stuff didn't come around until all of a sudden, as a young person, I lose this identity as this basketball player. And I know you have to identify with that, being a college ball player. Like, my entire identity was being this ball player, and all of a sudden it gets taken away. So it's like, what am I? Now I'm lonely. Now I don't feel accepted. And so let me just go kick it with the party crowd. And so I start getting a little messed up, always having fun. Girls are there. Yeah, this is it. This is the life.
It's so easy to, for the viewer and listener, the ones that have been through that understand it intrinsically. But if they haven't experienced that, I don't know if they realize how easy it is to be drawn to that crowd.
Right.
Because it's, for me, my experience, and I can only speak from my experience, the reason it was so easy for me to get closer to that crowd is, in my mind, I was like, well, I feel accepted here. I don't feel judged here, because they have no space to judge.
Right.
Right. They're also involved in that world. Whereas in athletics, there's a lot of judgment. You perform or you don't. And if you don't perform, then the judgment is like, you're no good.
Right.
In the party world, that doesn't exist in the same way.
Right.
Right. If you're there and you're partying, you're good. You're part of the scene. And so it's almost like a pressure-free way to transition, is how I would think of it, and release into this next chapter of your life. I think the challenge is some of us get stuck.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't view it as like, this is just a step, because there's lots of people that go through like a party phase and then transition into a totally functioning, normal human being for all intents and purposes. And then there's some of us that are like, that's not the story.
Didn't work for me.
Not the story. So that started to take place during your senior year when you lost ball.
Yep.
You started to explore with different friend groups.
Yeah.
Drugs, alcohol, that sort of thing.
I ended up going back to my school in Ohio. There was no reason for me to be going to a prep school if I wasn't going to be playing ball there. And so I went back to Ohio and just kind of fell in with my old crew, guys that we're hanging out with. And, we were high school partying. There wasn't hard drugs or anything like that. Some guys smoking weed and us drinking here and there on the weekends, stuff like that. But I didn't really see hard drugs or anything until I got out of high school.
Did you like smoking weed?
No.
Me neither. I tried multiple times to like it.
Right.
I wanted to like it.
Right.
Because it seemed like the people that liked it really liked it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It never got me where I wanted to, it never got me where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I want to get fucked up, I want to be fucked up.
Yeah.
And it just didn't do that for me. But my view on weed is not what most people is, especially in the recovery community. I think it's a little bit different, but I'm just speaking, authentically and honesty from my experience. When it came, I'm a heroin addict. I never had any qualms whatsoever about shoving a needle into my body. There was nothing in my brain that ever registered like, oh, this is fucked up. I shouldn't be doing this. I didn't ever have that. It was like that for every drug I did. Every drug I did, I'm like, this is it. This is it. Let's go. What's next? And so never bought weed. I was never a big weed guy. But on the rare occasions that weed would be around and I'd take a hit or two, that was literally the only time where my brain would think in a rational manner and be like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm sticking needles into my body. I'm shooting heroin. Like, then it would make me think like a rational human being. But my normal brain never had that. And so when I got sober, you know, I don't need weed, so I don't smoke it. But I've just always, me personally, I've just always had a hard time classifying that as a drug in the same sense of, you know, alcohol, cocaine, you know,
right.
any of these other things, because it's like, man, like, how does this one substance get me to think in a normal, rational manner that my normal human brain can't? Is just bizarre to me.
No, and I'm with you on a lot of that. I think the way that I try to think of it, because here recently I've met people that I've become close with that their drug of choice was marijuana. Mm-hmm. Like that was their easiest and best way to escape. They'd tried other things, but it didn't do what marijuana did for them.
Right.
And so for them, their chemical makeup, whatever's going on inside of them, their trauma, that's what spoke to them.
Yep.
And so I try to, my view on all of it at this stage is I try not to pass judgment on any of it. Mm. It's like, hey, if that's your reality and it feels that way, I love you.
Yeah,
I get it. You know, and food's like that for some people, or whatever. There's all these different things. I think that my view on marijuana is hit or miss in the recovery community. And I'll state it for the same purpose of authenticity. If you're an addict, you're an alcoholic, and you transition to this quote unquote Cali sober approach, and you're using it as an escape, I don't consider that sobriety.
Right.
Right. And replace marijuana with whatever you want.
Right.
Right. I would still think of it the same way. Do I think it's better to be addicted to marijuana than it is to heroin, meth, cocaine, and alcoholic? Yes.
Right.
That's just my truth.
Yeah.
I'd rather, like, if I was forced to choose at some point in my life and, you know, God said, your kid can either be addicted to meth or marijuana, I'm going to choose marijuana.
Right. Right.
So, but that's not me saying that people's experience with marijuana isn't as bad.
Right.
Because some people's is.
Yeah. And I think, and it's kind of cool, like the era we're in as far as recovery goes, because, you know, once you get a little bit of time up under your belt, you start figuring out, you find what works for you.
Yeah.
It's not anything I would tell anybody that's new in recovery, like, hey man, find what works for you. That's not the case. Like, no, 90 meetings, 90 days, get in the big book, like all that stuff. I'm not telling people to go out and smoke weed or anything like that, but not all us addicts are the same.
Right.
There's, you know, just like you said, different chemical makeup. You could do opiates and be knotted out puking. I could be do opiates and I'm rearranging every can in my cupboard so it matches and lines up. Like, it just hits us different. And so, yeah, I don't think people that are smoking weed by any means, like, that's not sobriety by any stretch, but is your life unmanageable? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, is it something, I'm an addict, so I know that I can't smoke weed, because if I do, I'm going to smoke weed every fucking day. And I don't want to be tethered to anything anymore.
It goes back to the steps in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Right. If you can look through all those things and tell the truth and it's not impacting it,
right.
Cool.
Right.
I think that's, and I agree with you on different strokes for different folks. Mm-hmm. But I also agree with you if someone comes to me and says, I want help, I want to take the steps, what do I need to do? Mm-hmm. You need to get in a meeting.
Yeah, for sure.
Like 100%. Now.
100%.
And if that changes over the course of time, that's fine. I've met tons of people that are like us that I don't align with,
right? But
they're still sober and they're still successful,
right?
And they're still working their thing,
yeah.
And that should be celebrated,
yeah, for sure.
This mindset of like it's my way is that's the addict,
right?
Of saying like, oh, my ego, like I know the right way. The reality is, it's dependent on that person,
yeah.
So Sorry, I had to ask about marijuana and we dove off into it. But good conversation. So normal kind of partying in high school. My experience, very similar. Nothing extravagant yet. Was it 1920? Like where were you at in life when that first exposure to like what we would classify as not alcohol or marijuana? Like when was that?
So I had one illustrious career or semester in college. That was my college career right there. And so once I figured out that teachers didn't give a shit whether you showed up to class or not, that was all I needed to know. Never showed up again. But I started hanging around in different crowds, going over to different towns and stuff. I'm trying to think the first time I had, it would take me, ended up finding or doing a couple lines of coke and was like, man, this is fucking great. Just sit up and talk, you can drink, like, hell yeah, let's go. So started discovering that, and I remember, I did this one semester, a college, and quickly realized that wasn't for me, and so I had to make a move. And so I decided I was going to join the Air Force, and was starting to party, you know what I mean? Cocaine was becoming like an every weekend thing, maybe once in the middle of the week. And then as I'm leaving for basic training, I remember I had a couple of friends over, and it's just, I had lines all over my mother's living room. I'm blowing all this coke before I'm getting ready to go to the military. And I remember that was how it was when I was leaving. You know, people were partying, but nobody was like crazy. Nobody was, asked out yet. And then I went and I left for the Air Force for a while. And then the first time I came back home, I just remember the entire area had been leveled by Oxycontin. And I start seeing these guys that I had, grown up with and went to school with and partied with. They're like sitting there telling me, bro, you don't want to fuck with these. You don't want to mess with these. And then, I did my time in the Air Force. I ended up doing 6 years. Was very misguided. I was stationed over in Germany. I thought I missed back home. I thought people were doing these big, amazing things. And so I come back home, see that this area is just nothing is going on, and started hanging out with my old friends, and then within no time started doing oxys. And then I didn't realize they were getting a hold of me until all of a sudden I thought I had food poisoning one day, and here I was going through withdrawals. And then I realized, I was like, oh shit, like this is a little bit more than I thought. And so then, like us, a lot of addicts, I decided I just need to move and everything's gonna be good. And so within 2 years, I bounced around to 5 different states. Everywhere I went, I'd burn it down within no time and then have to move somewhere else. And then ended up in Miami, Florida at the end of that 2 years. Was completely, was broke, no place to go, nothing to do. And that was the first time I had called home. Family kind of knew something was going on, but not fully. They knew I had a little bit of an issue with oxys, but they thought me moving away was going to be the key to success too. And so I go down to Miami, and I end up, this is a funny story how this all ends up happening. I don't know if I've told you this, but so it's my first time going to treatment, and I was too afraid to call my mom and let her know that I was messed up. So I called my aunt. And so my aunt calls my mom, and they talk, and they decide my mom and my grandma are going to pay for me the first time to go to treatment. And so I ended up getting shipped from Miami to Tampa to go to detox. And I go into detox, and I remember talking to my mother on the phone, and she's like, go ahead and pick, wherever you want to go to treatment. This is going to be the one and only time we're going to pay for it. Do your research, pick somewhere good. I'm kicking dope. I ain't doing no type of research. And so I'm sitting there, it's a couple of days in detox. I hear about everybody going to this place in Louisiana. And so I'm like, all right, cool, I'll go there. So I get shipped down to Louisiana. I show up, and it's like this big, beautiful plantation home, and there's another plantation home in the back, and there's all this land. And it was a cool little spot. And I go up in there, and the first couple of days, I'm like getting my wits about me. And every room I go in, there's a picture of this guy on the wall. And I'm like, who the fuck is this dude on the wall in every room I go in? This is crazy. So I think it was like day 3. I'd leaned over to one of the clients, and I was like, hey, man, who's this dude on the wall here? And he goes, that's L. Ron Hubbard. And I was like, who? And he's like, L. Ron Hubbard. And I was like, who the fuck is that? He's like, oh, he's the founder of Scientology. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, oh, wait till I show you. And so this is back when they had portable DVD players. And so he takes me up into his room, pops in the South Park episode that explains what Scientology is. And I sit there and I'm like, where am I right now? Like, holy shit. And so I ended up doing 4.5 months in Scientology rehab. That was my first experience of trying to get sober. Got high the first night out, did not work. Could have been because of me, maybe not because of the program, but that was what all those kind of years held for me as I got out of high school and led me up to that. And so, at that point, I finally got out of, for the time being, had got my shit together enough to where, I had brief relapse when I got out, but I was like, I got to do something. And so I ended up joining the Army and ended up getting shipped down here to Texas and been here ever since.
Man, what year was your first stint in rehab?
That would have been 2005-ish.
2005. So 2005, you're in Louisiana for 4.5 months.
Yeah, 2005, 2006.
2005, 2006. So you're
somewhere in there.
You're in Louisiana somewhere for 4.5 months, which is wild to me. I think we could probably go on for an hour about that because I have so many questions about it, but we won't. And maybe another time. You decide, okay, was it the structure of the military that you're like, hey, this will help me like restructure my life? Was that a thought, or was it just like I need to do something?
Yeah, they'll take me.
Okay,
they'll take me, and I know I'll be all right. I always knew that about myself. Like everything would be good. I'm very good in structured environments. So as long as I have those parameters, and I'm pretty good. Mm-hmm. I can operate very well in the military or in sports teams, stuff like that. When I had that structure, the problem is when I don't have that structure. And so I was like, all right, when's the last time life was good? Life was pretty good while I was in the Air Force. Let me try to get back to that. And so they weren't accepting prior service at the time. It was harder to get back in for some reason. So I was like, cool, let's do the Army.
Got it. So you go into the Army. This is 2007.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You get shipped to Texas.
Yep.
Where are you based at?
Fort Hood.
Fort Hood. Okay. So for me, what's crazy is like I think when I look back at my story and then I'm hearing yours, this thing is always present regardless of where we're at or what we're doing until we're ready to be like, hey, this constant thing that's in my life is what's wrecking it. Not where I live or who I date or what my belief system really is. It's this thing. It's like, do you remember, was it before that you looked back at it like that thing and said, man, this is it. This is the problem. This is the common denominator. Like when did that happen? Was it Air Force, after Air Force, Army?
It's a good question. I never had any issue ever admitting that I was an addict. Mm-hmm. I didn't go through that. Like I knew as soon as the pills got me, like they got me. But I was just always talking my way in and out of things, and I never got in trouble. I was always able to skirt my way in and out of trouble, and so I just never had any consequences. And so until I finally would eventually, go through so many things where there's no more options. It's nothing but consequences now. That's where I was like, oh shit! Like, all right, this is unmanageable. I just can't keep faking the funk and getting by like this.
So you talked about like legal troubles,
mm-hmm.
and I think that for me in my experience, so I was arrested on 4 different occasions, all of them drug and alcohol related.
Mm-hmm.
Like never once. I've never been in trouble if it wasn't revolving around those things.
Right.
But none of those woke me up because, to your point, I kind of always got out of it, or the charges would get amended.
Yep.
Or my lawyer would figure out a way to like, oh, this isn't going to actually be a DUI, BUI circumstance. This is just going to be like a reckless operation, but we're just going to keep it in court long enough where they finally drop it down to this. And so like I don't think I ever took it for what it was. So for me, the legal troubles never really woke me up because I never got to a point where I was really facing something where I was like, oh, this is going to take years of my life.
Yeah.
So I had the shots across the bow, and everyone around me was like, these are your wake-up calls. And I'm like, nah, this is nothing, man. It's cool.
Right.
Because like you, I feel like I could justify everything.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk my way in and out of everything. So, but legal troubles for you was part of the wake-up call.
Eventually.
Okay, so how long? Not to speed through this too quick, because that isn't my intent. But how long were you in the Army? 2007 to
about 4 years.
Okay, 4 years.
I almost made it through my enlistment, and then ended up failing 2-year analysis. We deployed to Iraq, came back. The wheels fell off for me and a lot of the people in our company, and so it was just, bro, I'd just stay out of the way. They call it shamming. I just out of sight, out of mind, stay out of sight and out of mind as much as I could, just so I didn't get myself in any more trouble. To where eventually everybody kind of knew what was up. They knew I was on something, and so that's what ended up getting me kicked out eventually. And then as soon as I get kicked out, it was almost immediate. I caught totaled my truck, DUI, woke up, had no idea why I was in jail, what had happened. Got out of that, and within weeks had caught back-to-back felonies for heroin possession. And then it's just complete. Dude, there was on one time I was on bond in 4 different counties, sitting there looking at doing like all this time. Ended up getting 2 years TDC. Went away 2 years to prison. Got back out. Came to Austin. Wasn't doing well as soon as I got out. Immediately started hanging back out with the party crew and all that, and so that would eventually lead me back down to catching 2 more felonies, my 3rd and my 4th possession case in the state of Texas. And so it all came to a head, and I had that big realization moment of when I went in initially to accept those charges from the judge. And so I tell everybody all the time, like, I thought I was a badass. I thought I was a tough guy. I've been in the military, I've been in prison, I've ran around every shady neighborhood of every state I've ever lived in. I've been fine. Like, I thought I was a badass. And so I stood in front of that judge that day. He told me he was going to enhance that 4th felony and charge me as a habitual criminal, and that he didn't see any reason to sentence me to under 20 years. And the moment he said that, all the tough guy shit went right out the window. And I was just like, yo, like, 20 years, like, to me, that might as well be a life sentence. Like, how has this all happened? How has my life become this? I was raised right. Like, what have I done with my life? And so that was the big wake-up call right there.
Two questions or thoughts around what you just said. The first one I want to ask him, it's probably a little bit of a vulnerable question, but I know you well enough to know at this point to know you don't give a shit. You just want to be real. How did you feed your habit financially?
It depends where.
However,
yeah.
Was it kind of like
by any means
necessary?
Yeah. A lot of getting credit cards, standing at gas stations, being willing to fill up people's tanks and take 50 cents on the dollar. I never stole, never got down with any of that. I was always just, cash advances, whatever it was.
Hustling.
Yeah.
Did you ever deal?
I mean, I wouldn't, to feed my habit, yes, but I would have never classified myself as
Right.
I'd sell a little bit here and here and do a lot of middleman stuff. I'd be able to. Yeah, I'd be able to get money and like get enough to where I could sell and keep re-up into the month to feed my own habit, but I would never have called myself like a dealer.
Right. Yeah, no, I was just curious. I think because the conversation, that hustler mentality of by any means necessary, I think is something that still is applicable to our lives today.
100%.
Just different outcomes maybe.
But I was just having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and he was saying he's always asking me questions about getting sober in the recovery world and all that. Like, it's kind of cool to have a regular person want to know so much about it. And so he was saying something, and I never thought about it this way until I was explaining it to him. But he was like, like the drug addicts and the hustlers. And he was explaining it, and I was like, bro, you really want to talk about hustlers? The addicts are the hustlers.
Yeah.
Like, we make something out of nothing every single day. They just happen to have a product that sells itself. Like, who's the hustler?
Right.
I'm sure they wouldn't like to hear that, but you see a motherfucker ain't got 2 nickels to rub together, and by the end of the day comes up with a couple $100 every single day, day in, day out. Like, that's a hustle right there.
Especially without stealing, if they're not stealing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's that mentality for me is kind of carried into this approach of like when I hear people today that are like, I can't pay my light bill for whatever reason. It's like, well, you don't want to pay your light bill enough.
Right.
Because if you did,
right,
you'd pay it.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing's applicable. So I wanted to ask that. The next thing I wanted to ask you is I've never had the experience where someone says, hey, you're facing 20 years. I couldn't imagine it. I couldn't fathom it. I can understand why you say like that stripped you of your ego. I can empathize there, right? I can connect with that. But, you know, when you think about, and this is my own inexperience asking this question, and maybe you can help me make the connection. Do you think there's people that get that 20-year offering, right? And they're like, whatever. Like, because I've heard rumors that like you can get whatever you want in prison. If you want to get high, you can get high, right? And in their minds, like, well, if I can find a way to sustain that, I know I'll get food. I know I'll get some level of care. I know I have shelter. Do you think that there's people that 20-year thoughts, like whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many sides of this coin. You have a lot of homeless people. They prefer to be locked up in county because they got 3 hots and a cot every day. Mm-hmm. There's people that have been completely institutionalized, or this is just part of the procedure with them. You know what I mean? They're out for a little bit, they go back. They're out for a little bit, they go back. And in that world, it's just more credibility to whatever their shit is. He's been down for this many years. He's been down this many times. It's like glorified. The biggest realization moment I ever had in prison, I remember always growing up and I would see people with clearly they have jailhouse tats, mm-hmm. right? And I would see that and I would always sit there and wonder why growing up. I'm like, man, when they get out, why don't they go get that like touched up at a regular shop and like make it look good? And then it took me, I was going from county, getting ready to be shipped out to go do my time in prison in TDC. And I remember this dude walked in, he was a young guy, and he came in, and we're all in the tank getting ready to go, catch and chain, they call it. And he comes in, he goes like, man, I can't wait to get down there. He's like, I'm gonna have all penitentiary ink, like blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, it's a badge of honor to him. Like, he's glorifying that. So when he gets out, everybody knows he's been in the penitentiary. And that's the moment where I had like separated myself, where it's like, man, there was a time in my life, I remember I was so delusional that I was like, man, I could do time. Like, that ain't no thing. I'll do time. And then I did time and I was like, yo, fuck this. Like, this is not what this is. Like, there's nothing cool about this shit. Fuck this all the way. And so when you tell me I'm going to do 20 years, it's like, I've been there and gotten myself back out and got myself in like a civilian mindset. I don't want to go back into prison and sit there and constantly on guard. Now it becomes super racially segregated where I'm looked at crazy if I'm talking to the black guys or the Mexicans, or like I got to only hang out with white dudes and like these country motherfuckers that I don't have anything in common with, but because they're white, I got to sit next to them. It's like, I don't get down with all that. And it's not something I ever wanted to go back to. Mm-hmm. So it was just such a realization when I was like, all right, man, I'm like, wait a minute, this is the route I'm choosing, and I literally don't have anything in common with this route. What the fuck am I doing?
Yeah, and to tie that into what you said in the previous statement at the end, the what the fuck am I doing thing, I can connect with that around when I think about my childhood. I had a mom that loved me. I had a stepdad that loved me. I didn't starve. I had a roof over my head. Mm-hmm. Part of my deepest shame and guilt that I carried was like I had all those resources and still fucked it all up. Mm. Still fucked it all up. Like, how can you be so stupid, right? That's how I felt about myself.
Yeah.
Like dude, you're a waste. Like there's people out here that don't have anything making something. Mm-hmm. And you had those opportunities. You had that, let's call it what it is, privilege. I had that privilege. And so much so that I didn't care enough almost and decided to blow it all up.
Right.
So when you said that, I could connect with that when it's like, how does one do this?
Right.
So the other question I had about TDC, I've got a friend actually who's in TDC right now, and parole violation, had to go back. But they had shared with me before they went back, like this concept or this thought process of, similar to what you're saying, like there's people that don't connect it with being the worst thing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of how he came off. He's like, yeah, it sucks, dude, but like, it's cool though. And then I meet people that are like, fuck no, never again. Like, kill me. You know what I mean? I'm not doing it. And so it sounds like you're more on the latter. where it was like, I'm not doing that shit again. No matter what it takes, I'm not doing that shit again. So when you get out, that's when you go back into treatment, or what does that process look like for you from ending the prison stint?
No, so I still I did 2 years, got out, was on parole for a short little bit, and bounced around some, all within this kind of local area of Texas. Went and spent some time in Temple, and just still wasn't doing well. Still got back on dope eventually. Very toxic relationship. It was all the typical addict things. And then so I catch these other 2 felonies now, and they tell me they're sending me away for 20 years. And so at that point, I'm like, all right, there's nothing I could do. I'm going away for 20 years. So the least I could do right now is at least try to get on speaking terms with my family. So they'll at least talk to me while I'm gone, hopefully write me some letters. And let me at least try to kick drugs right now so I don't got to go kicking county. Because kicking in county sucks. I mean, kicking anywhere sucks, but kicking in county, it's cold, the food sucks. Like, it sucks. Sitting on a metal toilet, not great. And so I was like, all right. And so I talked to my lawyer, and he said, as long as I can get you a continuance if you want to go get some help. And I was like, all right, bet. That's all I need to hear. And so the VA had a program, and I jumped into that. It was like a residential program to where I was there for 8 months. I did so much time there to basically where they were like pushing me out of the door. And so one of the things I did, and I still don't know why I did it, but I'm not a super organized person. I've never been like a file folder type of guy, but for whatever reason, I had a folder, and so I just started throwing everything I had in this folder. Every note that I took, every worksheet that I did, every test we took, every meeting I went to, I just started keeping all that stuff for whatever reason. And then the more I got into 12 steps, started going to AA, started actually partaking in AA, getting to know people and sharing my story and doing all these things. And then people started to kind of rally around me because they knew I was looking at going to do 20 years. And so people started coming out of the woodwork to like write me character letters. And so I ended up having this super fat folder. And when I got done at those 8 months at the VA, it was time to go start talking about sentencing with the lawyer. And so I went down, talked to him, handed him the folder, and he opened the folder up, and he was just like, I never expected this out of you. Like, you've really given me something to be able to work with here. He's like, whatever you're doing, I need you to just keep doing it. But let me take the folder, and I'm going to go talk with the judge. And so that was like that was a very big defining moment in my story, my life, and everything, because that was like the first moment where I had felt hope in as long as I could remember. And so I was all in, like whatever I could do. So I remember going back to the VA and asking them to check back in, and they're like, no, sorry, you've done too much time here. So the only place that would take me was a place in Austin. It was state funded. It was called a New Entry. And so I called them. It was a 6-month inpatient program. And, I think about my journey through recovery up to this point. I've been in treatment 12 times total. This would be my 12th. And I would always try to like make a deal with it where it's like, I'll do treatment, that's fine, but I just want to do the minimum of treatment. So like outpatient, that's all I need. That didn't work. 30 days, that's all I need. That didn't work. 45 days, that's all I need. That didn't work. And so this position that I put myself in now, where it was like I just did 8 months in an inpatient program. Now I'm about to check into another six-month program. But that was like, I had finally, I think, noticed that I had some growth where it's like, I don't care how long it takes. I'm looking at 20 years. He told me what to do, and when I'm keep doing it, 6 months, yeah, let's do it. I was willing to do anything. And so I happily checked in that 6-month treatment center. And that was like the beginning right there. It was like, got this sense of hope. There's nothing stopping me. Let's go.
It sounds like a moment for you where rationality kind of took over too.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, even if my sentence goes to 5 years, I'll trade 6 months for that.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And I think that that's so important for people like us, though, to have that moment of clarity where we're clear enough to like grab some rationality, because there is no rationality in the throes of it.
Right.
Like, it's all, for me, in my experience, I can only speak for that, but it was all kind of just like, it's not that big of a deal if I'm high,
right,
or I'm fucked up.
Right.
It really ain't that big of a deal. It is what it is.
Right.
Until you're not fucked up anymore, and then you're like, holy shit.
Exactly.
This is a really big deal. This isn't good.
Right.
Let me get fucked up again. So I don't feel, you know what I mean?
Right. And bro, that's why it's like, I tell people it's like two different humans.
Yeah.
I look back at the decisions I made in addiction, and I'm like, who the fuck was that? Like, I was dumb.
Yeah.
I can't even identify with the thought process, the things I would say, the way I dressed, the way I acted, all that shit. Like, none of it made sense. None of it makes sense to me now, but molded us who we are today.
Yeah, no doubt. I think of it the same way. I look at pictures of myself still, and I can see the hollowness, just the emptiness.
You still have stuff pop up on like
Memories.
Yeah, on Facebook.
Yeah,
bro. I said this same thing. I was speaking to a youth group at a church not long ago, and I was like, you guys know how like when your story or your past memories pop up on Facebook, and they looked at me crazy. They're like, "What? You think we have Facebook?" And
yeah.
I'm like, oh damn.
Yeah.
Starting to show my age now.
The worst for me isn't even the photos. They'll be like status memories from 10 years ago. And like, it's clear I was fucked up when I wrote the status. And I'm reading it and I'm like, bro, what the fuck? What are you saying right now? Like, this isn't you.
Yeah.
And it was funny. Like, it's funny now, not funny now, but it is. You go back and read the comments on this status and you're like, those people had to be reading this shit thinking like, fucking homeboy's lost it.
Right.
Like, he's off the deep end for sure. And I didn't give a fuck.
No.
So transitioning though, you do this 6-month program. You're all in. You're like, this is, like I said, the rationality takes over. You're like, this is a great trade. If this helps at all, it's worth it.
Yeah.
You finish that up, I assume the 6 months. Then you go back to court for sentencing, or they've already worked a deal? What's that look like?
A bunch happened, dude. Like it's. I told you I've been in treatment 12 times, right? And one thing this whole journey has taught me is it doesn't matter where you go to treatment. There's no, a good treatment center. If they're being honest, they will let you know, like we're not going to save your life. Like what you do once you leave here is going to be what saves your life. So we can prepare you, but there's no 30-day treatment center you're ever going to go to that they're just going to get you sober. And if they tell you they can or they're going to, they're lying to you. Yeah. And so I go to this state-funded place where theoretically, you know what I mean, it's probably what you would think would be the least opportunity to be able to do it. And so, hold on, now I forgot what your question was. I'm not going to lie.
No, you're good. I was asking, like, was it during the 6 months that you found out about your sentencing?
So, bro, like I had a complete transformation once I got into this treatment center. And so I go into this treatment center, and very shortly after I got there, I had some sobriety time up under my belt, but I remember one morning like taking a look in the mirror. And I took a look in the mirror, and I fucking hated who I saw. I grew up an athlete, and I was looking at myself in the mirror. I was fat as shit, miserable, unhealthy as hell. And I was just like, I fucking hate myself. And so in my head, it doesn't matter how much sobriety time I have. Like, I fucking hate myself, so I'm going to get high. I wasn't saying I was going to go out and get high. I just knew that was going to be on the horizon. And so I found out about a little running group that met in downtown Austin. And so I'm like, all right, I was never a runner growing up. I played basketball, football, baseball. If I was running without a ball of some sort in my hand, I was in trouble for something. It was punishment. And so I never could have dreamt what running would ever do in my life, or the levels it would take me, or any of that stuff. And so I just wanted to lose a little bit of weight. And so I ended up going to this run group, and I show up and my ego's all big, and I see all these men and women, and I'm like, dude, I got this. And I was dead last on the run that day. Could barely finish 2 miles. Was still smoking a pack of Newports a day. But I just felt this sense of accomplishment when I got done. And I was just like, man, this feels good. Like, it felt good. I finished it. It was hard as hell, but I finished it. And so I kept going back. And then I made a deal with myself, like, all right, as long as they meet every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to be here. And so I kept going. And pretty quick, like 2 miles turned into 3 miles, 3 miles turned into 4 miles. Now all these people that were looking at were super fast people that I never thought I could even contend with. Now I'm beating them, and I was like, all right, let's go. And so it was such a big thing to happen for me. And, you could do all the therapy and all the work you want to. But one of the fatal flaws I see in a lot of this stuff is like we never get back to baseline. And so you're coming off drugs, and then most likely you go see somebody and they tell you you're depressed or you have anxiety, and then they put you on more medication. And it's like, damn, I never got back to being healthy at a normal point. And so I kept this running thing going, and I go back to the treatment center and just realize, like, my depression, anxiety, like all this stuff when they labeled me PTSD, agoraphobia, sleep disorders, nightmares, all these things that it started kind of like melting away a little bit and getting to like a more manageable point. Didn't go away by any means, but, and so this was like changing my entire experience in treatment to now where before I'd be the tough guy sitting in the back of the room, now I'm the dude sitting in the front row answering all the questions. Now before when a new guy comes walking in, I'd be sitting in the back, me mugging him, trying to size him up. Now I'm the first dude like, hey man, what's up? My name's Shawn, anything you need? And so it was just having this profound effect on me. And so about halfway through that treatment center, I ended up getting a call from the lawyer. We're going back for sentencing, and they ended up giving me max probation, 10 years. And then I luckily was able to discharge off probation at the 5-year mark, which is the first allowable day that I was allowed off. They did let me off. And so.
What was the feeling like, and we'll backtrack back into this. I want to like fast forward and then come back real quick.
My bad. Once I threw the running shit in there, I knew it was going to fuck it up.
Yeah, it gets exciting, and it gets hype. When you get the 5-year probation and then you finish that, they cut it in half. How long had it been since you weren't under some sort of advisory?
It was quite a long time. And I remember I'll never forget, my wife and I had just laid down in bed, and it was probably like 6:30 p.m. on a weekday. And all of a sudden I get a call from Waco, a 254 number. And so any call that I'm getting from a 254 number is not good, because it's either somebody I used to party with, somebody I used to buy drugs off of, or it's probation. And probation calling you is never a good thing. And so I'm like, what the fuck are they calling me for? And so I pick up the phone, and the woman was like, Mr. Livingston, I just called to inform you, congratulations, you've been discharged off thing. And then my wife's screaming in the background. And like, I just said, thank you. This is amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. And hung up the phone, and I just had to sit there for a minute and kind of let it sink in. And it was just like, damn, like that chapter's closed now. Like it's finally closed. It was just that one little thing. It didn't matter all these good things that's been happening in life and accomplishments and getting married in a house. It was still on probation. And then to think of that where it's like, holy shit, like that part is finally, that chapter's closed. Holy shit.
Yeah, I think it's something to be said, and my brain does something very similar. No matter what happens in a positive light, sometimes there's these strings attached to the past. And I can imagine how probation would be a string of like, doesn't matter, like it's just never going to be enough until that goes away. And I've had different strings, and I think that what I came to realize, and it sounds like you did too, is like you almost have to have an acceptance of those strings in order to continue progressing in other areas. Because if not, and you might be like me, I can spiral over a string and be like, well, fuck, what's the point of all this shit if this is what we're dealing with?
Yeah.
Right? I'm on probation the next 10 years. Fuck it. Like there's no way I'm going to make it through that. I might as well fuck it up. Like that's the kind of crazy shit that goes through my head. And I think a lot of people might struggle in that same way.
Yeah.
But I want to back up into the running thing, because very similar to you, the night I got sober, I had this moment in the mirror. And it was like eerily similar to what you just described. Former athlete looking in the mirror and legit saying like in my head, like, what the fuck? Like that's what comes up. And it wasn't just physical for me. Like physical was obvious, right? I'm looking at my body and I'm like, this is embarrassing. Like and I still see that guy sometimes, just full transparency. So anyone out there who has that body image thing going on, it's real.
Very real.
And I feel you to this day. But it wasn't just physical for me. It was spiritual, emotional, mental. It was the first time I really, really looked at myself. And I don't mean, again, just from like my body image. Like looked in my own eyes and was like, there was nothing looking back. That's how it felt. I was like, golly, like this ain't it. It's got to go the other way. And it's so funny to me now that the first thing I thought to do was go for a run.
Right.
And it's like, why? I hate running.
Yep.
I swore off running. I'd never run again after football. And I get like you, if there wasn't something in play, if I'm running, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm running from somebody or running towards somebody, or I'm getting punished. So I have no clue what really triggered that, other than like I had some close friends who were into that space, but I don't think that really that created it. I think it was more like, honestly, full transparency, running started for me back as a punishment. I was punishing myself. Like, you got yourself in this position, like you need to punish yourself. And the way that I knew to punish myself was to run. Mm-hmm. And similar experience, the next day I wake up and go for a run, like lace my shoes up. I didn't know shit about nothing. Right. About hydration. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't think about it. I'm an athlete, right? I'll be fine.
I didn't even know what good running shoes were.
No clue. I'm in like some bullshit.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm like, doesn't matter. But I need to go back there sometimes and remind myself, I got it done then.
Yeah.
So I need to get it done now. Mm-hmm. Right. I know the shoes now.
Yeah.
I know the recovery. I know good programming. I know good nutrition. There's no excuses.
Right.
Because I figured it out then, and because I was hungry. And I think that I stepped out the door and I was like, I'm going to run 1 mile. It took me 16 minutes and I couldn't even run the whole mile, but I finished it. And similar to you, like, this is where my head was at then. I was so pumped that I had finished that mile. I was like, dude, I just earned a cheat meal, baby. You know what I mean? I ran 1 mile. Right. It took me 16 minutes. Like, that would never happen now.
Fucking chicken and waffles, let's go.
Yeah, I can eat all that. I won't gain an ounce. I'm still losing weight in my head.
Yeah.
And I just kept going back. And what kept me going back was like, all right, day 1 was 16 minutes. Let's see what day 2 is. 15:54. Okay. I can grow about 6 seconds. And one of the greatest things that happened to me is I didn't understand. I had a Garmin Instinct watch for work, but I didn't understand any of the GPS stuff. I still really don't. I've shared this with you. I know nothing about technology. Nothing. And I go into work one day and I'm bragging to my peer, my coworker, one of my closest friends, still to this day, who's an immaculate athlete, like off the chains. And I'm like, dude, I ran a 7:30 mile yesterday, right? I'm like, that's unreal. This is like 2 months in. Mm. And he's like, that's crazy. Let me see your watch. So I give him my watch. And he goes in there and he's like, go home and do it again today, man. I was like, all right, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to beat that. I'm going to go 7:25, right? I ran like an 11:13. And I went back and I was pissed off. I'm like, what'd you do to my watch, man? It's not funny. Like, I've been clinging on to this hope. He's like, well, your GPS wasn't on. You know what I mean? So I'm like, it's in here. It's counting steps, right?
Right.
And heart rate.
Yeah.
And it's thinking like, man, this dude's really putting out.
Right.
And in reality, like, I was, but not at a 7:30 pace. Yeah. So either way, to get into your running side, the release that you got that first time when you accomplished something, would you say that you ever, or you continue to seek that feeling? Like, what is it about the feeling for you that made it something in your head of like, this is something I want to do?
Good question. I don't know. I think at first it was just running at first just became this I don't want to say easy way, but it was it was the thing that I could do while in treatment where I could challenge myself and overcome something. That was it was tangible. It was like different than I'm going to show up to group today or I'm going to participate in group. It was like I can go push myself. And then, it definitely sparked something in me on the competitive side, to where, like I was saying, there was fast people in the run group, and pretty quickly I was getting up with them. And so it just had sparked that. It would take me like discovering races and all that to get it to change. But I don't know, man. It just made me feel better. Mm. And the one thing I always tell people is like, especially people in sobriety, and I don't know if regular people feel like this too, but I feel like when I got sober and I didn't have substances in my body anymore, I felt like everybody operated here and then I operated down here. Mm. It was like I was dumbed down, I was in a fog, and it was only the running was like what kind of pulled me out of that. And so it was just like, all right, this is making me feel better. And I mean, we're addicts, dude. We're addicted to feeling good, and that was as good as it was going to get at that time, so let's keep doing that. And then all of a sudden, now my gut's going away. Now I'm more happy. Now I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing in treatment. You know what I mean? Then I hear about there's people that run trail races and ultra marathons. And I'm like, what the fuck's that? Oh, cool. And so it was just like this whole new world of things. And, you know, one of the things I always talk with people in early recovery or people that are trying to get sober and stuff like that is the dangers of trapping yourself in like a recovery bubble. Because that's what would always happen to me. Is I've been in and out of treatment 12 different times. I'd done the 12 steps and I would just chill in that recovery bubble where that was my entire identity. Everything I did, talked about, everything I went to was just recovery, recovery, recovery. And I didn't understand that was meant to be a foundation for me, but it's on me to find something that's going to put a light up under my ass and get me to go in life. And so I had stumbled into running and it became this thing where it was like, man, I'm so passionate about it. I'm able to push myself. I'm having all these mental health and physical benefits, and let's just keep fucking doing it. See what happens.
I want to take a second and dive into that statement around getting caught up in the recovery bubble. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the people I've talked to have had a similar experience where if they don't get a vehicle out of that bubble, whether it's running, it could be their professional career, it could be family stuff. There's a million things, right? It's easy to be in that cycle. I've got a really good friend of mine who I care about deeply that the past year and a half has probably spent, so in 18 months, he's probably spent 16 months of that in a facility. 16 30-day facilities.
Yeah.
Right? And when he's there, he's great. You know, clarity comes back, all these things start happening. But I don't know if it sounds like for me, he hasn't found his vehicle from there to the next location.
Right. And
I was wondering if you could elaborate on like your thoughts around that, and I'll share mine too, but I think that that's an important conversation to have, that full-time recovery as a lifestyle is wonderful if it works for you. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. But it doesn't necessarily work for everyone.
Right.
In that same way. Like as far as like that's your whole life, that's all you do, that's all that matters. I think it's important to say out loud that it's okay if that's not what works for you.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate a little bit on your thought process behind that?
Yeah. I think I started, as I got into running, I fell into the trap where that was my thing, right? And so I remember somebody asked me a very important question. They're like, well, what if you got injured? What if you lost running? And I was like, oof, good point. And so like I needed to understand that this was a tool that only enhanced the recovery aspect and only enhanced my life. And these are all tools, just like the recovery thing is a tool. My identity can't be a runner, just like my identity can't be I'm in recovery. There's people that have mental health things where they get diagnosed as bipolar. Now their entire identity is I'm bipolar. Like that's their thing where it's like, okay, it's something you suffer from, yes, but that's not who you are as a person. And so that was a big realization for me, getting to understand, about the bubble. And it's a controversial thing to talk about because there's a breed of people out there where this is the end all be all, this is the only way and all that. And if that is the case for you, then awesome. I remember one time somebody had asked me, they had invited me out to speak at their facility, and because of the documentary and all these things that I had been doing. And I remember they had asked me, and they were like, well, how many people do you sponsor? And I was like, I've worked the steps. I do have a sponsor. I'm not currently sponsoring anybody. I've discovered this way to be able to like share my experience to help others, and this is what I've been doing, like living in the traditions and all that. And he did not like that answer. He was like, well, you're really selling yourself short and all this. And I was like, I mean, you asked me to come out here to talk to your people, and I'm selling myself short now because I'm not doing the way things you're doing. Mm-hmm. I had some other people that would hear that I was getting into running and I was running ultra marathons, and they would come to me and they're, you're just replacing one addiction for another, right? I was like, all right, like I hear what you're saying, but if you're going to tell me this thing that I've discovered in my life that has put structure, discipline back into my life, it makes me go to bed early, it makes me wake up earlier, it makes me drink water, it makes me eat healthier, put all these amazing things back into my life, has introduced me to the greatest group of people I've ever known, has completely lit a fire up under my ass, has made me excited to be alive and excited to be sober. If you're going to tell me these are all bad things, then I don't know if we can continue to have this conversation. And so one of the things a quick story I always like to tell people, and I usually tell it wherever I go, is, I had a big realization when I ended up in Austin. And so where I come from, it's all rundown steel mills and crack houses, and it's not great. And so I ended up in Austin, and the sun's out, and then I discovered a place called Town Lake and Ladybird Lake, and I start going and running down there, and all I know is it's day or night, and there's people there all the time, and they're smiling, and you're going to see big people and little people and old people and young people, pregnant moms pushing 2 baby strollers, just out there getting it, people riding their bikes. And I just remember going and running down there and just having this feeling. I'm like, man, this is so fucking cool to be here. Like, I'm not used to this. This isn't the culture that I came from or anything, so this is just awesome. And so all the time I go run at Town Lake. And so me and a buddy of mine, we were running, and we were doing the loop, and we had come up through a place called Zucker Park. And for those that don't know Zucker Park is like some rolling hills, and it's a very social part of the trail, and you're going to see people playing frisbee and volleyball and out there doing picnics with their dogs. And that day, as we came and ran up through there, I look over and I just see like 150 grown-ass adults running around with broomsticks in between their legs and hula hoops everywhere. And my jaw hit the floor, and I'm like, what the fuck are these people doing? Like, what are they doing? And my buddy, he's dying laughing at me, and he's like, oh, they're playing that game from Harry Potter. And I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? I've never seen Harry Potter. And he's like, oh, they're playing Quidditch. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but that shit is wild to me. Yeah. Like, I've just never seen anything like that. And so he's laughing at me, and I'm laughing at them. And I remember we kept running, and it took me a little while, but I remember it just started to sink in where it was like, damn, I feel very lucky to have ended up here in this city, because if you can find that to do here, you can find anything to do. And it's like finding these good groups of people, good, healthy people that are doing good, positive things. I'm willing to bet most of those people out there playing Quidditch that day weren't worried where they're going to get money for the crack man later. And so, one of the big messages I tell people that I work with or speak to is being able to get outside of your comfort zone and discover that new thing. What's your thing going to be? All this energy that we used to put into the hustle and getting high and getting drunk, what are we going to put that into now that we're sober? Because it's still there. Yeah, you can go to your meetings, you could do all that, but what are we going to do with that energy? Let's channel it into something positive. And so, those of us who have ended up in Austin, we're blessed to be around music and art and bike riding and rock climbing, running, food, Quidditch, whatever you want.
Yeah.
But find that thing, man. Like, get outside your comfort zone and discover some of these new things, because I was never a runner growing up. You were never a runner growing up. But had I not got outside of my comfort zone and tried something new, I would still be stuck in that same thing. And so it's like you evolve as a person, and that's what I needed to do. I needed to utilize the recovery community and the work and everything for what it is meant to be, which is a foundation, and then it's on me to get out there and build my life outside of that.
Love it. I think of it too, in connection to that, is the more I progress as a human, the harder it is for me to return to where I was at. Mm-hmm. And some people call that running away from it, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. I'd take my life today over 5 years ago.
Fucking right.
And so for me, that's kind of how I make peace with it. The other thing I'll say about Austin, I agree with you that you can get sober anywhere. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that you can get high anywhere. But if I would have stayed where I was at or went back home versus coming here, I'm not sure my chances would have been the same.
Right.
That's all I know. I don't know. I'm not willing to say Austin got me sober, because I don't believe that. But damn, if it didn't help.
Yeah, for sure.
You talk about running around Ladybird, and we've gotten to do it a couple times now together. Mm-hmm. The amount of connection on that trail without words being spoken is something I haven't really ever experienced in anything other than athletics. Right? Like in basketball or football, like I don't have to like you,
right,
to understand that you understand what's happening right now and want you to do well in that. Even if like that means you beat me, right? That's hard, but like that's athletics. And then on the trail, it's like for me, there's the happiness on the trail and the smiles and all the joy. That's great. But what really gets me fired up, man, to keep going and take it deeper is, I'll put it this way, for safety of conversation and to eliminate the risk of getting canceled. There are people out there running on that trail every single day at 5:30, 6 a.m. that have absolutely no business out there running on the trail. Like, they shouldn't be out there running, and they do it every single day. They show up. And man, when you're out there and you're suffering and you see that, good luck slowing down.
Yeah.
Good luck stopping.
Right.
And I wonder at times, and I'd love to have, I want to have a conversation with some of these people and ask them why. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to know why.
Yeah.
Because they have every opportunity to say, I'm not doing this shit. Like, what? For what?
Right.
There's something there. Running does something for everyone. I think you have to allow it to happen.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing for running, for me, is no matter how good a shape I get in, no matter how many miles I run a week, that first mile, getting out the door and starting that first mile, takes your boy's ego every single time. Every single time. I'm like, can I do it, man? Can I? And that might be shocking for people to hear, but like, we ran 15 miles yesterday. And I've been running. But the thought still crossed my mind when we started yesterday of like, man, can I make it through this?
Right.
Like, am I good enough? Am I worthy?
Right.
Like, or is this all fake? Is this a flaw? Like, this is just not real? And then you get out there and you get moving, your blood gets moving, and something happens, man, where it's like, okay, it's just one more step.
Yep.
Over and over again. And then you finish, and I can say this for myself, the highest I've ever been since stopping drugs and alcohol is the elation I get when I complete something hard. Do I chase that feeling? Sure. I'll own that. And I can sleep just fine at night with that, and so can my mom. She would choose that too.
Right.
But running, for me, started off coming back into the game as a punishment. But for me, it just represents life now. It's this picture of life. There's days I don't want to show up, but I do.
Yep.
There's days I feel great, and it's easier. That's life. All of that happens, though, over and over again, and what I think it does for me is prepares me for the rest of my life. Because if you do hard things, you create your own suffering, your own struggle, you humble yourself. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about this a little bit, but it's essentially humble yourself or God will. Right? And forgive me for those out there that are super technical with the Bible. I'm not. I read a scripture a day and like feel good about it. But that was my translation of that message. And so I believe it. I believe if I humble myself, one, God's not going to humble me in the same way.
Yeah.
And these things that pop up throughout the course of the day, I feel more mentally prepared and stable to deal with them appropriately. Whereas if I'm not channeling that energy, I release it inappropriately, right? Whether that's saying something smart ass back to someone, you know what I mean? Or like saying something rude or coming off the wrong way and or not showing up in the right way. And so running for me has become this thing that gives me life. But in that same breath, to your point earlier, it's given me so much life, I'm not sure what else can give me that much life in case something happens to running.
Right.
Because it's given me so much. It's given me everything in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so I think that I didn't learn that until I lost running through injury. And you have lots of moments of like, oh shit, man. Like, what am I supposed to do? How am I going to get till tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like, what do I do with this energy? And my prayer, my hope for anyone that happens to is that you're deep enough into your recovery to have developed some other tools. Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to this and you haven't developed any other tools yet and your only outlet is running and you have nothing else, I plead with you to just maybe look at something else.
Yeah.
Maybe try something else. Maybe painting, right? Whatever works. But don't corner yourself.
Yeah, build on it.
Yeah, build on it. Use it, keep it, build on it.
Right.
Yeah, I love that thought.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. Dude, the big PSA for people out there, even with, I don't know if people, this is a good, I'm able to bring this around. I just watched this, have you watched that Skywalker's A Love Story documentary on Netflix?
No.
So you know the people that go out and they like scale the tallest fucking buildings in the world and like hang off with one hand and stuff like that? There's a documentary on Netflix and it tells the love story of this couple. They were like the best man and woman in Russia to do this stuff and they ended up coming together. And I would always see that. I'd see people do that parkour, you know what I mean, on real tall buildings. And I'm just like, holy fuck, like these people just have no fear. Well, you watch the documentary and come to find out these people are very scared what they're doing. Like they're very scared. So I was like, oh, wait a minute. But now you sitting here talking about us at running, most people that don't run have only ever tried to like run a mile or run for a very short time. Big PSA for everybody. The first couple miles of every run always sucks. I don't care if you run every day. You could be an average. I think most runners would say that. It's like my body is not working correctly. My lungs haven't caught up the way I need to be breathing. But like you said, you hit this point where it's like all that gets warmed up and you're like, all right, now we can run. Here we go. And so it's such a barrier for people to like adopt this as a lifestyle or to do hard things because it sucks at the beginning. There's no difference between you or I or the person that's like not willing to run other than I'm willing to embrace that suck for just a little bit longer than what somebody else may be. You know what I mean? And it's like getting people to understand was you see people doing stuff, you do something hard over and over until you make it easy. Mm-hmm. And so running's become this cool thing in my life. And then I adopted the gym for a while, and then, I met you, and honestly, there's a couple contributing factors, but that's one of the things that wanted me to get back into running because I'm a competitive person. And I had taken a look around my life, and it was like, all right, I'm in the gym, and the gym has now just become like a normal part of my everyday life. I'm not drawing the same inspiration I was when running was just a normal part of my life, and I discovered the gym, so now it was a new inspiration. And so it's like rediscovering running now and then doing it with somebody that's going to force me, you're training for a 100-miler, I'm just getting back into it. So the fact that we've only been running together for 2 weeks and I've taken my miles up from nothing to 15 miles within 2 weeks, it's like, all right, let's fucking go. I'm around the right guy because you're drawing the best out of me. I hope I can draw the best out of you in the same way. And it's like iron sharpens iron. These are the type of people I need to keep around me. And so anybody that's listening to this, man, you need to take a look around at the people you're keeping around you. I keep motherfuckers around me that make me uncomfortable because it makes me, I never want to be the worst at anything. I don't want to be the dumbest. So I'm constantly trying to learn and get better and better because I don't ever want to be around that. And then once you get into a room where you're the smartest, toughest, strongest, fastest, whatever dude in the room, it's time to get into a different room and keep building on that shit.
I agree wholeheartedly with that approach and that thought process. And I get the question though, people will say, well, does that mean you leave everybody behind? Here's how I would answer that. If you're around the right people, they're going to grow with you, right? If we become the fastest people we hang out with, which probably will never happen, right? But if we do, we're both going to go to that next level together. So you're not leaving anyone behind unless they choose to stay behind.
Right.
Right. And I think a lot of people, you develop these communities, especially in recovery, and you get comfortable.
Yeah.
Because you're like, man, I feel safe here. I'm not using, I'm not drinking. My family's happy with me. They're talking to me. I have a 9-to-5. I'm paying my bills. Like, why do I really need to shake that up?
Yeah.
And for me, I never wanted that. I never wanted that to be the end of the story. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, he figured it out and he's working his 9-to-5 now and like life's good. He's got his family and his apartment, whatever. That's beautiful for people if that's what their dream is and that's what they want. It's beautiful for them, and I celebrate that wholeheartedly. It just wasn't for me, and still not. And I remember vividly the experience. So we had the conversation around getting caught in the recovery bubble. And I want to tie that back into. Mm-hmm. And I'll be vulnerable and share my experience of when I knew I needed to utilize running or these other vehicles and grow my community. That didn't mean I needed to leave a community behind. It just meant I needed to grow my community. Yeah. But I was sitting in a meeting, and there was a share from someone who had been around since I started, and they had a lot of time. Every day it was the same message, though, and it was of misery. And I don't know what it was in that moment. It just hit me different, and I realized I'd heard that same thing for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I got to get so far. I got to get so far away from that. I don't want that. Like, I can't live that way. It was almost like in my brain, I made the connection of like, damn, I'd almost rather go back out than to feel like that every day for the next 40 years. Mm-hmm. Right. And I was like, I just got to do something different. Now, with that being said, I think that I have some growth, right? Because I heard what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
There was lots of messages and people sharing that things of beauty and service and the things that I care the most about. But the addict in me heard that and got scared and was like, I can't do that. I gotta chase this. I gotta pursue this elsewhere. And so for me, I think that I'm getting to a point where I'm willing to find community in those areas again. But it's taken a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I full transparency and vulnerability, I stepped out of the rooms at 9 months. That's the last chip I got. Mm-hmm. 9 months. Just hit 4 years. Right. And I don't say that to boast or brag. That's not the point of that. It's not me saying I did it without it at all, because it would have never happened without it.
Yeah.
But I'm getting to the point now where I'm realizing like it's okay to have community in different areas, mm-hmm. and it doesn't all have to be one thing, to your point. Because I love the people in the running community, but and I love people in the professional community and all these different communities. But what's interesting is somehow, some way, whatever community it is, I always find myself back with the addicts.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's different.
Yep.
It's just different. And you could see it. You know, you could feel it. It's like I don't have to ask you if you got my back. You don't have to ask me. You know, I know. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And there's other levels of understanding of like, you don't have to shed like all of your feelings and emotions and guilt and shame to me for me to try to comprehend where you're coming from.
Right.
I can just feel it. And there's something about that that's like, it's a blessing. So I don't ever want a life where addiction isn't part of my community. Mm-hmm. I don't want that life. I always want a life where that's close to me. Because it's beautiful. And people are like, what? Like, what do you mean? What I mean by that is when you work through this process, there's this, for a lot of people, this common place of, man, the greatest thing about me is that I was an addict.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that ties it back into the very beginning of this conversation. The part of me that people want to judge the most is the part that I love the most, because that thing is what allows me to do exactly what I'm doing today.
Exactly.
It's what drives me to do what I do today. And without that thing, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
And I wouldn't trade this for anything in the world. So I think that that's something that's interesting, because no matter how you work through your process, no matter how you get sober, no matter how you stay sober, no matter what you choose as your next addiction or newest community, I think it's very important in this community that none of it is cast out as wrong or incorrect. you got to work what works for you.
Yep.
So transitioning out of that thought, so I haven't said this yet. You have a podcast.
I do.
When did that pop up in your head of like, I want to have these conversations publicly, right? Because there's part of you that was probably, well, to backtrack a little bit further, right? And I want to make sure we talk about this because it's something that it took me like a couple months to actually watch what I'm about to talk about, because I was like, I don't know if I can see it. I don't know if I can watch it. There's a documentary on Shawn about a lot of this journey and process we've been talking about. And a lot of it's centered around running. But when I watched it, I texted you. I was in Colorado. I was up there working. And a mutual friend of ours, actually, who you just met, reached out to me and said, she said, essentially like, hey, I just watched this documentary. She's like, I'm bawling. Like it broke me. I'm like, so I put it off. I'm like, I can't, if it broke her, I know it's going to break me. So I'm going to connect with it. So I waited till I was all alone in a different state, totally away from everything. And I put it on. And it did. It broke me. And I've shared this with you, but before we dive into like the podcast stuff, I have to talk about this, man. If you're struggling or you know someone who's struggling and you're looking for a sliver of hope, you got to go watch this documentary.
Give me goosebumps, bro. Thank you.
Just a sliver. It was a whole pot for me. Right, it fired me up. I was ready. I was like ready to rumble. Tears rolling down my face, ready to fight whatever demons I needed to.
Right.
But you don't need the whole pie to make a change.
Yeah.
When you're in the depths of it, sometimes you just need a sliver. Mm-hmm. If you're searching for that sliver, I highly, highly recommend watching that documentary. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that came about before we get into the podcast stuff and what that experience was like for you?
Sure. It's the most crazy, surreal thing that's ever happened to me to ever be sitting on a podcast and talking about this movie and all that. Never anything I thought would ever be a possibility in my life. But I ended up, my story amongst addicts isn't anything crazy. The regular people not in the recovery world hear some of the things we say and their eyes bug out of their head. If you walk into an AA meeting or, some type of recovery event or whatever, and I tell my story, it's not gonna raise any eyebrows. We've kind of heard it all before. That button in our head of hearing crazy stuff is kind of dead for us. But the running thing is kind of what started setting it apart and getting people to take notice. And so I ended up doing an interview with Austin Marathon, and they had asked me a really important question. And I always like to throw this in when I tell the story because it was probably the most important question I was ever asked. And it was, Shawn, what would you go back and tell your younger self, if you could, to change so none of this stuff happened? Mm-hmm. And, much like you said earlier, the things I was most ashamed of at one time in my life are now the things I'm most proud of. I'm uniquely qualified to be able to do what I do and work with the people that I am. And so I thought about that for a while, and, there was 1,000 things running through my head, but I came to the conclusion, it's like, all right, I'm sorry for everybody that got hurt along the way, but I do understand now that I had to go through every single thing that I've been through to be who I am today, and I wouldn't change that for a thing. Nothing. And so, they asked me to do that, or they told me that, and so that's when I started understanding. It was like, all right, people started reaching out to me once they knew my story and heard my story in this interview, and started telling me things about themselves, and I'm like, wow, holy shit! Like I didn't think all this bad stuff could ever be a positive in any way. And so shortly after that, Lance Armstrong had read the interview evidently and then invited me to come on his podcast. And so I hadn't done anything media-wise, never been in front of a camera or anything like that. And so I do his podcast and was able to share some of my story. And the next thing I know, a director had reached out and asked me if I'd be willing to be a part of a bigger project. And he wanted to film a documentary on my story. And it just so happened I'd gotten into ultra running at this point. I've been running these races, and I just happened to be training for a 100-miler. And so it just everything kind of came together. But I thought this guy was pranking me. Like, I didn't know this was a real. People don't just call you and say they want to make a movie on you. And so the more we talked, you know, I just kept that in my mind where it was like, all right, if my experience can help anybody, then I'm always down. And so that's something I'll always say yes to. If somebody asks me to come tell my story, come speak somewhere, to be able to show the documentary, yes, all the time, yes. This is why I do this. And so we ended up, I was running the Pinhoti 100. It goes from Alabama to Georgia. And they flew down and filmed the race. Don't want to give everybody what, you know, spoilers of what happens, but you know, it's a crazy experience. And I remember, you know, a big light bulb moment for me was the first thing they had filmed was this race. And so they had come up with the sizzle reel, or the mini trailer. And so they wanted to get some excitement out around it. And so they had set up an event here in Austin. I think it was, oddly enough, it was at a local bar. And they invited 150 of the Austin running community to come out, a couple of the run groups. And so all these people up to this point knew me as this runner, and most of these were all road runners. So they knew me as this crazy trail runner that's running ultra marathons and all that, but they didn't really know who I was yet. And so all these runners come in and the lights go off and they play this sizzle reel. And within 3 minutes, all of a sudden now every one of these runners knows me as a 4-time felon, kicked out of the military, heroin addict, homeless, mental health, like all my deepest, darkest things. And then the light comes back on, and I just remember, like, I felt like I was naked. Like the whole world could see me now, and I'm just like, oh my God, like, what are these people going to think? And I was absolutely blown away by the amount of people that came up to me that night and started sharing their personal experiences from people in their family, friends, things that didn't even have, traumas that didn't even have anything to do with addiction in any form or fashion. But just the ability of, or the, you know, me being vulnerable and willing to open up about my stuff, able to open the door for them. And so I was just like, man, holy shit. And so over the next year, we would, you know, that taught me a very valuable lesson in being able to use my experience to help others. And then, you know, they got my family to be involved. And so I hoped my family would be able to get a piece of that too and understand that there can be some good to come out of all this pain and hurt. And they would find that out firsthand. You know what I mean? The impact that it could have. And so we did the documentary, and then unfortunately we were set to go into all the film festivals, and we were getting ready to travel around and do a bunch of promo with it, and quarantine happened. So COVID hit, and so now it like shuts down everything. Now they're doing virtual film festivals. And so you have to understand, me being in early recovery, you know what I mean? Me just restarting my life again, and this crazy experience of this film happening, and like you get all excited and all that, and then it all gets shut down, and I'm just like, oh, well, that's my luck. That's what it is. But everything happened how it should. The film ended up coming out. It got released on Amazon. It's on a bunch of the streaming platforms now. And, you know, we've been able to do some live events with it. There's a ton of facilities that show it all around the country. And, I mean, I always get people to randomly reach out through social media saying they just happen to catch it on whatever platform, and it's just crazy. It's anytime it happens, just like, man, how did this happen? You know, the end of it, I'm not bragging on it because it's my story, but the end of it is the director, his name is Andrew Chabet, he knocked it out of the park. The way he was able to tell my story and the culmination that brings it up to the end is, I mean, I've seen it 1,000 times. It still gets me every time. And it's just, you know, I look at my mother and my sister, especially my stepfather, and I'm just like, do you understand how this moment in our lives could have ever been encapsulated in this moment, in this film and stuff like that? And so it's just been the most special experience in my life. And, you know, something like that to happen to me, you know, there's that imposter syndrome of like, do I deserve this? Should this happen to me? But that's like that's what sits in my heart that lets me know, like, by any means, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be sharing my experience to help others. I've squandered every opportunity I've ever had in my life, and this is one that I will never let that happen. And so whatever it is, that's my main life's goal, is to just keep using my story to help whoever I can.
Plug the title real quick.
100 Miles to Redemption.
Here's 100 Miles to Redemption. Here's what I'll say without sharing the story, because you need to watch it. If you're in a place, shit.
It almost got me too, bro.
if you're in a place where you're questioning if you can come back, go watch this shit. It wraps up everything you could possibly imagine and gives you all the evidence of what's possible. And it's interesting now knowing you and then feeling like though even in this documentary I knew you, right? Like it was that raw, it was that vulnerable, it was that real. It wasn't made to look perfect, like in the sense of like it's easy and I'm the most badass human ever. It ain't built like that. It's the truth, and it's what it really feels like, and it really encapsulates the process and what it looks like. And so that's all I would say. If you're in a place where you need a sliver of hope and you're wondering what's possible and if it's worth it, go watch it.
And another thing I just want to add on to it, you know, there's so much out here for us addicts and alcoholics, but the one thing, the big glaring thing that always gets forgot about is the families, right? And so we have so many resources as addicts for us to get us back right. And I always thought I knew what I had done to my family. You know, I thought I knew what I had put them through. Until that film came out, I had no idea. And so to really, truly understand what I had done to my sister, what I had done to my mother, to understand that it's going to take them a while to go through a recovery of their own. They don't, just because I'm okay doesn't mean they're just okay.
Right.
And so like, yeah, if you need some hope and you want a good story, check it out. But if you're a family of somebody who's suffering and you want some hope or, you know, want to know that it's possible for them, check it out.
Yeah. It's the whole deal for sure. I don't want to bounce out of here today too without plugging the podcast. So all streaming platforms, we're talking YouTube, Spotify, Apple.
Yeah, all the major streaming platforms. The video's on YouTube, and then the audio is obviously on all the other ones.
It's a pretty, I would say, relevant title. But I Am Redemption.
Yes.
And it ties so well with the documentary. It ties so well with your story. It ties so well with, I think, a lot of addict stories and people in recovery stories, because that's what it is. It's an opportunity to redeem yourself, and the opportunity is real and it's tangible, but you're gonna have to be uncomfortable. It's not gonna feel good all the time. So I love the title of that. I think it represents so much. You talked about, and we don't have much more time, and I want to try to wrap it up, and it seems really apparent at this point in time we're going to have to do multiple episodes.
Let's go.
What I want to ask you, though, since we've got an opportunity to plug those things, and I think that's important, but one thing that I also think is really important to touch on that you brought up that I don't want to glaze over before we wrap is that first moment when the lights cut back on and you felt naked, I don't know the word, hypothetically naked or theoretically, somebody will correct me in the comments. But when you felt naked, was there part of that feeling outside of the shame, fear, guilt, all those things, was part of that feeling also freedom?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it was like the last sliver of that, because like I had already owned all my stuff within the recovery community, my family, you know, everybody knew I'd owned everything, but this was like the final thing. All right, these people don't know it, but I always relate it back to 8 Mile. It's what I always think of. You see Eminem at the end, and what does he do? He owns all his shit, and he uses it to his advantage to where nobody else can use it against him, because he's said it all.
Yep.
So there's no more aha moments, no gotcha moments or anything like that. So for me, that's like what it was, where it's like, man, they know my deepest, darkest stuff now. Like, what the fuck can anybody say to me?
Yeah.
Like, I've owned that shit. Yeah, I'm a felon. Yeah, I was homeless. Yeah, I was kicked out of the military. But it just goes like, all that stuff that I have been through is what has carried me to what I'm able to do today, and to have the tenacity or the willingness to keep pushing when I want to quit and go through these hard times. Because I think we as addicts, I think it translates so well in anything we do now. It's like we got very comfortable being uncomfortable. And so like I live in that.
I love that. Here's how I want to wrap this episode. Here's what I could offer up based on our conversation today to anyone out there who's still active. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be next week, it might not be next year. But if you stay in the process long enough, you will be grateful that you were in addiction.
Hands down.
And sounds crazy, sounds wild. And those out there that have been through the process or in the process, they understand what I'm saying, as do you. But I want the person who's still struggling to hear that today. Mm-hmm. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be next week. But if you stay in the process long enough, you will come to appreciate the fact that you were an addict.
Yeah.
It'll be your greatest gift. And today I'm grateful for that gift for sure.
Hell yeah.
So thank you for coming on, man.
My pleasure, bro.
I deeply appreciate you on so many levels. And again, we're gonna have to record more because I feel like 2 hours doesn't even start to flick the tip of the iceberg. You know what I mean? But I love you, man.
Love you too, brother. We're gonna get you on I Am Redemption. The world's gonna know.
Yeah. So keep spreading the message if you're out there for everybody. Tell as many people as you can. And that's how we're gonna kill this stigma one piece at a time. So keep spreading the message, keep spreading the love. Thank you for tuning in, and that's going to wrap it for today's episode of the Ain't Dead Yet podcast.